quickly going to try to get through freezeouts and as much of our first case as possible. Some preliminary notes is a freezeout is a corporate transaction whose principal purpose is to reconstitute the corporation's ownership by eliminating the equity interest of minority shareholders. Dissolution freezeouts assume that S, who may be an individual, a group, or a corporation, owns 70% of C Corporation and wishes to eliminate C's minority shareholders. In a dissolution freezeout, S causes C to dissolve under a plan of dissolution, which provides that C's productive assets will be distributed to S or to an entity S controls, while cash or notes will be distributed to C's minority shareholders. This technique has been held illegal in a number of cases, most of which stress that such a plan of dissolution violates a corporate norm of equal treatment among all shareholders of the same class. See example Inri San Joaquin Light and Power Corp. So dissolution freezeouts. S causes C to dissolve under a plan of dissolution, which provides that C's productive assets will be distributed to S. And everything else goes to C's minority shareholders. That's weird. Okay, but this is illegal. Per se illegal. 2, sale of assets freezeouts. In a sale of assets freezeout, C's controlling shareholder S organizes a new corporation, T, all of whose stock then S owns. S then causes C to sell its assets to T for cash and notes. Result, S owns C business through T, while the equity interest of C's minority shareholders in C's business is involuntarily terminated. C is then normally dissolved, although a freezeout would be affected when without dissolution. Even without dissolution, such a procedure has been disapproved in several cases. Debt or redeemable preferred mergers. A debt or redeemable preferred merger begins like a sale of assets freezeout with a organization by S of a new corporation T. However, instead of causing C to transfer its assets to T, S causes C to merge into T. And instead of issuing common stock in the merger, T issues either short-term debentures or redeemable preferred stock. Accordingly, the interest of C's minority shareholders in T either terminates automatically after a period of years, in the case of debentures, or is terminable at T's election in the case of redeemable preferred. Cash out mergers. Modern freezeouts commonly employ still a fourth technique. Most statutes now allow the survivor in any type of merger to issue cash as well as or instead of stock or other securities. This opens the door to cash mergers, which resemble debt or redeemable stock mergers, except that the survivor issues cash rather than stock or other securities. Under this technique, the freeze-out possibilities of a short-form merger are extended to cases where the parent does not own the percentage of stock. So there's sale of asset freeze-out. We talked about. And there's dissolution freeze-out. And there's debt or redeemable, which I kind of glassed over. I might try to read the definition of that one more time. Debt or redeemable preferred mergers. So a debt or redeemable preferred merger begins like a sale of assets freeze-out with the organization of by S of a new corporation. However, instead of causing C to transfer its assets to T, S causes C to merge into T. So there's a new corp. The target merges into New Corp. However, and instead of issuing common stock in a merger, T issues so no stock issued, rather debt or debentures or preferred, stock convertible. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that. But then any interest sees minority shareholders in T either terminates automatically after a period of years in the case of debentures or is terminable. So interest created by debt either term or are converted. Reverse stock split. This is another one. The traditional, then there's the cash out merger, and now there's a reverse stock split. So as far as the cash out merger, modern freezeouts commonly employ still a fourth technique. Most states now allow the survivor in any type of a merger to issue cash as well as or instead of stock or other securities. Of course. This opens the door to cash mergers, which resemble debt or redeemable stock mergers, except the survivor issues cash rather than stock securities. On this technique, the freeze-out possibilities of the short form merger are extended to cases where the parent does not own percentage of stock requisite for short form merger. So reverse stock split. The traditional stock split involves dividing the shares held into a larger number so that after 2-for-1 split, a holder of 500 shares will hold 1,000 shares. In reverse split, as the name suggests, it's just the opposite, so that a shareholder merges with fewer shares. Thus, a 1-for-25 split will result in a holder of 500 shares owning 20 shares. This can result in a freeze out if the resolution approving the split provides that the corporation has a right to purchase the shares of any holder of less than a round lot 100 shares. Thus, a corporation that wishes to rid itself of a large number of smaller stockholders can, through a carefully designed reverse stock split, empower its board to redeem the large number of odd lot holders. So Weinberger versus UOP Inc. in the Supreme Court of Delaware is the first case that we're going to read. We can just read the intro. This post-trial appeal was heard in bank from a decision of the Court of Chancery. It was brought by a class action plaintiff below, a former shareholder of UOP Inc., who challenged the elimination of UOP's minority shareholders by cash-out merger between UOP and its majority owner, Signal Companies. The defendants in this action are Signal, UOP, and certain officers and directors of those companies. The present chancellor held that the terms of the merger were fair to the plaintiff and the other minority shareholders of UOP. Accordingly, he entered judgment in favor of the defendants. In ruling for the defendants, the chancellor restated his earlier conclusion that the plaintiff in a suit challenging a cash-out merger must allege, so this is the pleading requirements, specific acts of fraud, misrep, or other items of misconduct to demonstrate the unfairness of the merger terms to the minority. We approve this rule and affirm it. The chancellor also held that even though the ultimate burden of proof is on the majority shareholder to show by a preponderance of evidence that the transaction is fair, It is first the burden of the plaintiff attacking the merger to demonstrate some basis for invoking the fairness obligation. We agree with that principle. However, where corporate action has been approved by an informed vote of a majority of the minority shareholders, we conclude that the burden entirely shifts to the plaintiff to show that the transaction was unfair to the minority. See example Michelson versus Duncan. But in all this, the burden clearly remains on those relying on the vote to show that they completely disclose all material facts relevant to the transaction. Here, the record does not support a conclusion that the majority stockholder vote was an informed one. Material information necessary to acquaint those shareholders with the bargaining positions of Signal and UOP was withheld under circumstances accounting to a breach of fiduciary duty. We therefore conclude that this merger does not meet the test of fairness, at least as we address that concept, and no burden thus shifted to the plaintiff by reason of the minority shareholder vote. Accordingly, we reverse and remand for further proceedings consistent herewith. In considering the nature of the remedy available, so there was an omission. Material information necessary to acquaint the shareholders with bargaining positions of Signal and IOP was withheld under circumstances amounting to a breach. We therefore, so that would equal misrepresentation, which would get it through the threshold. That's a threshold issue. And so then they did a test of fairness in which they found that was unfair. So in considering the nature of the remedy available under our law to minority shareholders in a cash-out merger, we believe that it is and hereafter should be an appraisal under Title 8 of the Delaware Code, Section 262, as hereinafter construed. We therefore overrule Lynch v. Vickers Energy Corp. From 1981, Title Lynch 2, to the extent that it purports to limit a stockholder's monetary relief to a specific damage formula. Okay, so we got a little bit of a change in damage calc. So they're pointing to the dissenting opinion in that case by McNeely-Quillen. But to give full effect to Section 262 within the framework of the General Corporation Law, we adopt a more liberal, less rigid, and stylized approach to the valuation process that has heretofore been permitted by the courts. While the present state of these proceedings does not admit the plaintiff to the appraisal remedy per se, the practical effect of the remedy we do grant him will be coextensive with the liberalized valuation and appraisal methods we herein approve for cases coming after this decision. Our treatment of these matters has necessarily led us to a reconsideration of the business purpose rule announced in the trilogy of Singer, Tanzer, and Rowland, and for the reasons herein set forth, we consider that the business purpose requirement of these cases is no longer the law of Delaware. So this is a pretty monumental case, and we're going to read more about it. I'm probably going to read into that trilogy too, but for right this moment, I'm going to have to probably take that offline.